The sun was just beginning to rise in the quiet suburban neighborhood, casting a soft golden glow across the neatly lined houses. For most people, the morning meant brewing a pot of coffee or getting ready for work. But for David, a middle-aged man who had worked hard all his life to finally retire peacefully, the day began with the sound of silence, the kind of peace he had dreamed of when he purchased his modest two-story home in a community governed by the local homeowners association. David wasn't a man who liked drama. He preferred gardening, tinkering in his garage, and reading books in the evening. That's why he had thought moving into a neighborhood with an HOA would be a good choice. Rules to keep things orderly, lawns trimmed, and neighbors respectful. At least, that's what he thought. The illusion of peace was shattered when Karen moved in. Karen was the kind of woman who made sure everyone knew who she was the second she stepped onto the block. With her oversized sunglasses, loud voice, and an ego bigger than her bright white Tesla, she strutted around as if the entire neighborhood existed for her convenience. While most neighbors kept to themselves and exchanged polite greetings, Karen had a knack for pushing herself into everyone's business. She was constantly finding reasons to complain. About lawns not being cut short enough, about kids riding bikes too close to her driveway, about people parking too close to her mailbox. And worst of all, she had managed to worm her way into a high position on the HOA board, which gave her the illusion of authority she wielded like a weapon. David tried to avoid her. He had heard the stories, seen the arguments she picked with others, but he figured if he kept his head down, she would have no reason to bother him. For a while, that seemed to work. Until one summer morning when David noticed something strange. His electricity bill had spiked dramatically. Being a meticulous man, he tracked his monthly expenses carefully. Suddenly, he was paying nearly double for electricity, despite living alone and using his appliances sparingly. At first, he thought perhaps it was a mistake, but when the second month's bill arrived even higher than the last, he knew something was wrong. Determined to get to the bottom of it, David went outside to inspect his property. It was early, the neighborhood still quiet, and as he walked along the side of his house, he noticed something that made his blood boil. A heavy-duty extension cord ran from his outdoor power outlet, across the side of his lawn, and straight into Karen's garage. His jaw tightened, fury bubbling inside him. She wasn't just nosy and rude, she was stealing his electricity to charge her precious Tesla. David yanked the cord out of the outlet. The click of it unplugging felt satisfying, but his anger hadn't cooled. Still, he wasn't a confrontational man. He figured maybe it was a one-time thing, maybe a misunderstanding. He coiled the cord neatly, set it by her driveway, and went back inside. Later that afternoon, however, Karen stormed over to his house. She didn't knock politely, she banged on his door like she was about to kick it down. When David opened the door, she immediately launched into her tirade. "Did you unplug my car? Do you have any idea how expensive these batteries are? My car was charging, and you ruined it," she shrieked, her sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. David stared at her, incredulous. "You were stealing my electricity, Karen. You can't just plug into my house without asking." Karen scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "Oh, please, you're retired, you barely use electricity. What difference does it make? We live in the same community, it's all about sharing." David's patience was running thin. Sharing is when you ask. Stealing is when you take without permission. Don't do it again. Karen's lips curled into a smirk. "We'll see about that," she muttered before stomping back across the street. For the next few days, David kept a close watch. Sure enough, one evening when he returned from the grocery store, there it was again, the extension cord snaking across his lawn. She had plugged into his outlet once more, as if their conversation had never happened. His frustration turned to disbelief. She wasn't just bold, she was shameless. This time, David documented it. He snapped photos of the cord, of the meter readings, of her garage with the Tesla plugged in. He wrote a formal complaint to the HOA, attaching the evidence, and submitted it, certain that justice would finally be served. After all, wasn't that the whole point of having an HOA, to enforce fairness and protect homeowners? But when the board meeting came, David's heart sank. Karen, being on the board herself, twisted the narrative effortlessly. With her smooth yet manipulative way of speaking, she painted herself as the victim. "I only borrowed a little power once or twice, and he's exaggerating," she said, her voice dripping with fake innocence. "Besides, shouldn't neighbors support each other? Isn't that what community means?" The other board members shifted uncomfortably, clearly not wanting to get on her bad side. In the end, they brushed David's complaint aside, suggesting he work it out privately with Karen. That night, David sat on his porch, furious. The HOA was supposed to protect him, but instead, they had enabled her. Karen thought she had won, and judging by the smug grin she threw him from across the street, she knew it too. David realized something important. If he wanted this to stop, he would have to take matters into his own hands. The next few weeks became a battle of patience. David noticed Karen's pattern. She always plugged her Tesla in at night when she thought no one would notice, letting it charge for hours while she slept. He knew confronting her again would be pointless. She thrived on drama and loved making him out to be the unreasonable one. No, this time he needed to be smarter. He started researching. Late at night, with his reading glasses perched on his nose, he sat at his computer, looking into ways to stop someone from leeching off his power without directly damaging his property. That's when he stumbled across a solution, a programmable power surge device. With the right setup, he could allow the outlet to function normally for a while, then trigger a surge that would overload any device connected without proper protection. David wasn't reckless. He knew he had to be careful. He wasn't trying to burn down her house, just teach her a lesson she wouldn't forget. After carefully preparing his plan, he ordered the equipment and began setting it up in his garage, fine-tuning it until he was confident it would work exactly as intended. Each day as he worked, he thought about Karen's smug face, the way she dismissed his boundaries, the way the HOA sided with her because they were too cowardly to stand up to her. The more he thought about it, the more certain he became, she had brought this on herself. And soon, Karen was about to find out that stealing wasn't free. The night was humid, the kind of summer air that clung to the skin. David sat in his living room with the lights dimmed, sipping tea and pretending to read while his eyes kept drifting toward the window. He had finished setting up his modified outlet that afternoon. From the outside, it looked perfectly normal, just a standard plug point on the side of the house. But inside, he had carefully wired the device that would let him control the flow of electricity. With the push of a button from a small remote, he could trigger a timed surge that would fry anything unprotected. It wasn't something he had done lightly. He had thought about it for days. He even debated just installing a lock on his outlet or disconnecting it altogether. But he knew Karen. She'd find another way, another excuse. She had already proven she wasn't going to stop. If he wanted peace, he had to make sure she learned the hard way. Around 10:30 p.m., David heard the faint scraping sound of footsteps outside. He didn't move, didn't even peek through the blinds. He knew what was happening. The click of the extension cord being plugged in reached his ears, followed by the low humming noise of current starting to flow. Karen was at it again. David set his book down, his heart pounding with a mixture of nerves and anticipation. For a few moments, he let the car charge as usual. The green light on her Tesla would be blinking steadily now, telling her battery it was feasting on stolen electricity. She probably thought she was clever, sneaking around while the neighborhood slept. After about 20 minutes, David picked up the small remote from his coffee table. His thumb hovered over the button. He could feel his pulse quickening. A part of him hesitated. Was he really about to do this? Was this going too far? But then, like a flood, memories of her smug voice washed over him. "You barely use electricity. What difference does it make?" The image of her smirk when the HOA had dismissed his complaint flashed in his mind. No, this wasn't too far. This was justice. He pressed the button. At first, nothing seemed different. The house was quiet, the hum of the current still steady. But then it happened. A faint popping sound echoed from outside, followed by a sharp crack. David's lips curled into a grim smile as he imagined the surge coursing through the line. He knew Teslas had built-in protection, but constant surges could do real damage, especially if the greedy owner thought she could get away without investing in proper charging equipment. A few moments later, the neighborhood silence was broken by a piercing alarm. Karen's Tesla began to shriek, a warning system triggered by the sudden malfunction. Lights on the car flickered erratically, flashing red and white in a chaotic strobe. David stood by his window now, watching the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction. Across the street, Karen's front door flew open. She stumbled out in her robe, hair a mess, panic written across her face. She rushed to the car, frantically pressing buttons on her key fob, but the vehicle only continued its loud, robotic wailing. The smell of burnt plastic lingered faintly in the air, carried by the night breeze. "What the hell?" Karen screamed, yanking the extension cord out of the socket and tossing it onto the grass. She circled her Tesla like a panicked animal, trying to calm the beast she had awoken. But it was no use. The battery had taken a hit, and the car was now locked in a safety shutdown. David sipped his tea, savoring the moment. He didn't gloat, didn't shout across the street. He just watched, calm and collected, as Karen's empire of arrogance crumbled in the span of minutes. By the time the alarm finally quieted, neighbors had begun peeking out their windows, murmuring among themselves. Karen, embarrassed and furious, yelled at them to mind their own business before storming back inside. Her Tesla sat lifeless in the driveway, its once glossy exterior now a silent monument to her greed. The next morning, David pretended as if nothing had happened. He went about his usual routine, trimming his rose bushes and sweeping his porch. Across the street, however, chaos reigned. A tow truck arrived, flashing its orange lights as workers struggled to load Karen's Tesla onto the flatbed. She stood outside, arms flailing, arguing loudly on the phone with someone, likely Tesla customer service. Her voice carried across the quiet block. "I don't know what happened. I plugged it in like always, and then it just fried. You have to cover this under warranty." David had to bite the inside of his cheek to keep from laughing. He knew Tesla warranties were void if the damage came from improper charging. And Karen had been plugging into a basic outlet with no surge protection for weeks. There was no way she was getting that covered. Over the next few days, Karen's attitude shifted noticeably. The once arrogant woman who strutted around the neighborhood now walked with a permanent scowl, her voice lower, her confidence shaken. Her precious Tesla was gone, and with it, a piece of her identity. Neighbors whispered about the incident, speculating on what had happened. Some thought she had neglected maintenance, others suggested she had been too cheap to install a proper charger. David never said a word. He didn't need to. The satisfaction lay in knowing the truth, in seeing the natural consequences of her own entitlement finally catch up with her. Still, Karen couldn't resist trying to spin the story. At the next HOA meeting, she arrived late, looking frazzled. When the subject of her car inevitably came up, she dramatically sighed and said, "Some people in this neighborhood clearly have it out for me. Someone tampered with my outlet. That's why my Tesla was destroyed. It's basically sabotage." Her words hung in the air, but this time, the board members didn't leap to her defense. Perhaps they were tired of her antics, or maybe they had finally seen through her manipulative ways. One member cleared his throat and replied, "Karen, if you were using someone else's outlet without permission, that's on you. The HOA can't be held responsible." The look on Karen's face was priceless, a mix of shock, humiliation, and rage. For once, she had no comeback. As the weeks went on, the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. Karen became quieter, her influence in the HOA diminished. Without her flashy Tesla, without the confidence to bully her way through every situation, she blended into the background like just another resident. And David, he finally got what he wanted all along, peace. Every so often, he would catch sight of her walking past his house, her eyes darting away quickly when they met his. He never gloated, never rubbed it in. He simply tended his garden, read his books, and enjoyed the tranquility he had fought to protect. Because in the end, justice didn't always come from rules or committees. Sometimes, it came from standing up for yourself, and reminding those who took advantage that every action has consequences. And for Karen, that lesson came with a price tag she wouldn't soon forget.